Bismillah. My name is Abdul Khabeer. My day job is associate professor at the University of Michigan, which is on Anishinaabe territory. Today, I want to talk to you about Black Muslims and racist state violence. On January 4th, 2017, Muhammad was killed by the Phoenix police. What was his crime? Wanting to use the bathroom. Muhammad was homeless at the time. He struggled with mental health and he had an emotional support dog. Her name was Chiquita. He had Chiquita with him when he tried to use a public restroom, which was against the rules, and the police were called. The police arrived and eventually they did allow him to use the bathroom, but while he was in there, they discovered that he had a warrant for failure to appear in court for having a marijuana pipe. And so when he came out the bathroom, they proceeded to cuff him to bring him into custody. At this point, Muhammad doesn't really understand. He is understandably upset and really anxious about what's going to happen to Chiquita when he is taken into custody. Muhammad doesn't resist. Nevertheless, he ends up surrounded by officers, 4 of whom are holding him down, and 1 officer with his knee on Muhammad's neck, choking him to death. What happened to Muhammad really illustrates everything that goes wrong when we call the police. I don't know the person who called the police, but I assume they felt the need to follow that rule. But what if they had someone else to call? Imagine if homelessness, blackness, mental health were not criminalized. And why did they need so many officers to respond to 1 man? It's been over 3 years since Muhammad was killed, and there have been no repercussions. The police were let off. His death came to my attention because there has been recent body cam footage that reached the media, and the similarities between his murder and the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota in May of this year. In the video footage, you can hear Muhammad scream out, "I can't breathe," like Eric Gardner, who was killed in 2014 by the NYPD. You can also hear him call out to God, "Please, Allah," to which the officer responds, "Allah, he's not going to help you now." In addition to being a father, son, brother, funny person, and great dancer, according to the family videos on justiceformuhammad.com, Muhammad Jr. was a Black Muslim killed by the police. He's not the first. In recent memory, there was Amadou Diallo, shot 41 times in 1999 by NYPD. Stephon Clark, shot and killed in his grandparents' background. 20 shots fired at him by Sacramento police. And most recently, Jacob Blake, who was paralyzed after the police shot him in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and there are others. Now, the police didn't kill Muhammad because he was Muslim. As Malcolm X once said, "We are brutalized because we are Black in America. When they lay a club on the side of your head, they don't ask your religion." But the flippant response by the police to Muhammad's cry immediately reminded me of how Black Muslims are subjected to a double burden of state violence, as Black people and as Muslims. Now, a Black Muslim is part of a wide cross-section of U.S. Muslims of African descent, those born in the United States and those who immigrate here. And they're all subjected to both the war on crime and the war on terror, to surveillance and systematic civil rights violations, aggressive policing, ICE detention, and mass incarceration. On the one hand, they are criminalized as Black people in a country where criminalization binds race to crime, so that there is the potential for criminal behavior in everything a Black person does. And then this then deputizes anyone to use violence when it comes to the threat Black people pose. So, Renisha McBride was murdered for knocking on a door for help. Trayvon Martin for wearing a hoodie to the store. Breonna Taylor for sleeping. Sandra Bland for driving. Muhammad for wanting to use the bathroom. There is also the potential for criminal behavior or in terms the media might use, terrorist behavior and everything a Muslim might do? If not, why was the NYPD spying on Muslim college student groups and email lists and whitewater rafting? And while we think of, or we tend to think of the Muslim threat as a 9/11 reality, the targeting of black Muslims for state violence is much older. 52 years before Mike Brown and Hands Up Don't Shoot, Ronald Stokes was shot and killed by the LAPD with his hands raised. He was among a group of Muslims shot at by the police, two of whom, when shot and laying on the ground, also called Allah's name, Allahu Akbar. Stokes was a member of the Nation of Islam, which at the time was a particular target of J. Edgar Hoover's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, established in the 1950s during the height of the Cold War. Driven by political ideology rather than fact, COINTELPRO cast a wide net, including not only communist groups, the explicit enemy of the period, but also other social movements and leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., who were deemed a threat to national security by the FBI. The NOI was considered a threat because the Islam it preached was considered un-American, and for its potential to organize a marginalized black community with transnational ties. The Nation of Islam was an imminent threat, despite its public proclaim of nonviolence and the corroboration of that claim by the government's own informants. So it was in this context that Stokes' community was surveilled by the LAPD. Beyond the Nation of Islam, black people who are Muslim have played key roles in the most radical movements of the 20th century. Movements that have fought for radical change in this country and understood that the struggles of black people in the US are connected to the struggles of black people everywhere, as well as the struggles of other related groups like indigenous struggles for sovereignty and global anti-colonial movements. Many of us have just completed what people call Black August, which began in the 1970s after the death of political prisoner George Jackson. And it's a time that encourages us to recommit to resistance and remember the plight of political prisoners held in the US. And yes, there are political prisoners in the United States. Many of them are now elders, having served 20, 30, 40 years and still in prison, and many are Muslim. Their Muslim identities inspired their organizing, mobilizing, and resisting against black oppression. The mantra of Black August, study, train, fast, fight, the fasting part of it is inspired by the month of Ramadan, in which Muslims fast. But it's also their Muslim identities that have made them targets. We see this in the example of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown, when he led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and was a part of the Black Power movement. He's now been in prison about 20 years, despite all the questions around the legitimacy of his conviction, as well as his age and his deteriorating health. The point here is that blackness, because of the criminalization of it, makes you a target. And being a black Muslim, because of the criminalization of both blackness and Muslimness, can make that target on you much bigger. So I started with Muhammad and police brutality, and of course, other vectors of identity, like gender, can make that target bigger or in different kinds of ways. So we have stories of Muslim women who've been protesting, and when they're arrested, their scarves are taken off for mugshots, right? Which is a violation of their rights, but a particular kind of form of state violence. So I started with Muhammad and police brutality and ended on Imam Jamil Al-Amin and political prisoners. And I did that because I believe it's always important to be cognizant of the way police brutality does not happen in a vacuum. It's not just the problem of a particular police officer or the police in a particular city. Rather, the police are part of a larger apparatus, national and international, in which the state, those who have power, economic power, political power, use violence to control our communities, to maintain their power, and to maintain a status quo in which black lives don't matter. And so black Muslims help us understand that a little better. So what can we do? Well, to riff off of Black August, we can study. Students and faculty, we can study and teach these stories, and we can fight. we can advocate, petition, organize to get justice for Muhammad, as we did for other victims of state violence, to release political prisoners like Imam Jamil Al-Amin, and on our own communities to defund the campus police and to find ways to work better with local communities that we live in. So there's a lot of information here, and there were a lot of resources I used to put this together. I'm going to use my Twitter page to drop all those links, so you can find that at Dr. Suad. And until then, remember, free them all. Palante.